So I'm Tim Ward, CEO, co-founder of Think Cybersecurity. So let's jump straight into this. It's worth pausing on this stat for a while because you will have seen it before, but it's been true for about 10 years. So something's not really working. But yay, we've got security awareness training. Everything's going to be fine. Let's go back. This has been true for about 10 years. So something is really not working. This is the typical reaction that you'll all be familiar with, that kind of next. And the NCSC is starting to realise this as well. So they commented in a recent challenge for startups, traditional approaches aren't resulting in behaviour change. The Information Security Forum did some research, suggested only 15% of people actually change their behaviour from doing our traditional approaches. And then, of course, you've got the wonderful phishing simulations, which really leave people feeling a little bit tricked, a little bit embarrassed. And there have been some great articles where people have really made bad mistakes here, offering bonuses during COVID and upsetting their staff quite significantly. So again, the NCSC urging a little bit of caution around these sorts of approaches. So it's worth stepping back and thinking about, we're doing all of this, how are we even measuring whether it's successful? So you're measuring whether people have done their training, what does that mean? Or you're measuring click rates. Well, if you've ever done a phishing test, you can get pretty much whatever click rate you want, depending on how hard or difficult you make the test. So what I want to talk about is 5 common mistakes that people are making in how they tackle security awareness. And I'll go through these one by one. And try and highlight that we need to think a little bit differently and understand the psychology behind behaviour, perhaps, to help us really solve this problem. So start with this one. It's just common sense. And I suppose what the message here is trying to say that, well, look, acting securely, it just makes sense. Why can't our staff do it? We all know how to do it. Well, this is a bit of a mistake, and it's based on our mental model. So as security professionals, we kind of understand this, we potentially get this, we have a mental model of how this works. And there's some interesting psychological issues here. One is called the curse of knowledge, this idea that if you know something really well, you actually find it quite hard to understand or explain or contemplate that someone else can't understand it. So that creates a real barrier. And then on the other side, we have the Dunning-Kruger effect, which means that people who perhaps don't understand things tend to have a higher or overinflated view of how good they are at something. It's a great example. Probably most people in here think that they're an above average driver. Now, that's not how averages work, so we can't all be. But this is Dunning-Kruger. So on the one hand, you've got people who think they know how it works, and on the other hand, you've got people who can't really communicate. The other side of what this could mean is our bosses saying to us in the world of awareness, look, it's simple, just get people to change their behaviour. Crikey, where do you start there? Behaviour is difficult to change. If behaviour change was easy, we'd all be fit, none of us would smoke, we wouldn't drink. It doesn't work like that. Behaviour is difficult. Our behaviour is this mix of habits, of context that can be social, physical, virtual. It can be conscious behaviour or it can be unconscious behaviour. So behaviour change is difficult. It's not common sense to solve this problem. It's just knowledge and understanding. So we've been doing mandatory awareness training. We've been giving out this knowledge and understanding for a long time. And the issue here is that awareness doesn't necessarily equal understanding. And it certainly doesn't necessarily mean behaviour change. And in fact, even experts make mistakes. They get caught out. They fall for phishing. So it's not purely a knowledge thing. And that's because behaviour is nuanced, really. So people can be acting insecurely completely deliberately because they need to get the job done and they haven't really got the tools or the environment to have a choice. Or they can be acting insecurely because they're making a mistake in the heat of the moment. So all that knowledge and experience has gone out the window because they've acted suddenly and through emotion and automatically. So it's more complicated here, again, than just simply knowledge and understanding. I like this one. It's almost just saying, should we just speak a bit more slowly or shout a little bit louder? It's not simply about getting the message across more effectively. But that's not to say we couldn't do better here. So I would definitely say that e-learning is not an ideal tool to solve this problem. It's a great tool when people choose to learn. We all use it when we want to learn something, but we're in a situation here where we need to kind of force our staff to learn. E-learning is not necessarily the tool to do that. We can do better content, and there's great things out there. Obviously, we've got better videos, we've got escape rooms and things like that. But I think it's worth thinking about Are we applying an understanding of how people really learn and behave when we use these approaches? Even simple things like spacing. When you're trying to learn something, you have to spread it out. When you revise for an exam, you do a bit of revision on one subject, then you do another subject and you come back to it. There's even evidence that says that if you mix up subjects, your brain has to work harder and therefore you learn more effectively. So spacing is just an example of something that's missing from traditional approaches to teaching. But I think there's an even more fundamental issue here, which is that our approaches just miss out some of the key aspects of behaviour, which are timeliness and context. And I'll come on to them a little bit more. But here's just a quick example. So here we have someone doing their security awareness training. You can tell she looks very, very bored. And as she does that, she's coming down what's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. She goes on holiday. She's definitely not thinking about awareness there. Gets back to work, lots of distractions. Maybe on one particular day, drinking quite a lot of coffee, she's been out late, lots of kittens on the internet, and then something happens. She's asked to upload a file by a client or something. Are we really expecting someone to have remembered the awareness training they got taught up there? So even if you're doing stuff quarterly, you're still hitting all these other problems of distractions and people forgetting things and coming down the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve that I think says that after about 5 days, you only remember about 20%. So the next mistake we're making is this idea of thinking that people act rationally. Unfortunately, and then the way we used to think was that, look, we're all here to maximise our gains and minimise our losses. But when you look into people's behaviour, you find that actually we don't always act like this. And that's partly because we act in different ways. We have this concept that Kahneman wrote about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, of different ways of thinking. Sometimes we're slow, we're deliberative, but probably only about 5% of the decisions we make each day. 95% of the time, we're reacting. Our brain cannot cope with all the information it's given, so it takes shortcuts and uses rules of thumb. And we're really heavily influenced by the context when we're taking that. And this is what the bad guys are doing, and I'll come back to this. But there's lots of things that help us in this, and the bad guys can use them, and they're the reason why we can't think people act rationally, but we can also use them ourselves. So anchoring, we're always looking for something to anchor a decision on. So is there something, have we been reminded about security recently that we can anchor on? Confirmation bias, together these two can cause an issue. In the fast-moving world of security, we might have trained people that their passwords should be, well, it doesn't really matter about the length, but they've got to be strong, lots of numbers and letters and characters. We've actually changed our advice now. But because we've told people like that, they dismiss new information and they stick to what you've already told them. So it's really hard to change those habits because of things like confirmation bias. Social proof is really strong. We can use it by sort of suggesting other people are acting security, are you? But if you've got people working in a department where, for example, the boss doesn't walk the walk, then you've got a real uphill challenge because social proof will kick in and other people will see other people not acting securely and they'll copy. We all think bad things won't happen to us. And so you really have to overcome that and help people understand that the threat's as relevant to them as to everyone else. And emotion is really important. So in the example with the person doing their awareness, if their client is asking you to do something, that's an emotionally charged situation and you will tend to forget about security and rush to do what you're asked. And finally, how available in your mind. So if you've heard something in the news or you've done your awareness recently, then something's available, you're more likely to act securely. The bad guys use these biases, so social proof, fear, desire, authority, reciprocity, all these things where it makes you click because you're not really thinking, your automatic brain is reacting. I'm completely contradicting myself, having said you're making a mistake of thinking people always act irrationally, because you can't think that all the time. Sometimes people are quite rationally and deliberately acting insecurely. And that's because they've got to do it, they've got to get the job done, and you've maybe put them in a position where they haven't got the tools to do that job in a secure manner. So if this is the situation, you really need to understand the context. What's going on behind this? And data is really important to help you here. Who's doing these insecure behaviours and why, to understand what's driving them to do them. So if you step back from this and think about what we're trying to achieve, is it about compliance? Well, yes, we do have to tick that box. I don't think it's about expertise necessarily, because even experts can fall for things. We need more than awareness. We need to start thinking about behaviour change, because if you actually want to reduce risk, then you've got to be changing people's behaviours. It's not just awareness. So perhaps what we want to do is try and quantify the human risk here, start thinking about the behaviours and understanding what behaviours are actually taking place, and then measuring that we're impacting them with our approach to awareness. So how might we do that? So 2 quick models to look at. BJ Fogg has a model of how does behaviour happen? What are the elements of behaviour? And he says there's an element of motivation. You've got to want to do the thing. There's an element of ease. Can you do it? Do you know how? But there's always some sort of trigger, some sort of cue or prompt that makes you actually act. And then the nudge unit, which was part of the Cabinet Office, is now the Behavioural Insights team. They talked about 4 elements of an effective nudge. So the first was this idea of ease. Again, if you want to nudge people towards a behaviour, it's got to be an easy thing to do. It's got to be attractive. They've got to want to do it. They pull out of this the element of social as a motivating factor. But again, they talk about timeliness. So just pausing on that, we've talked a bit about context, and here we're talking about timeliness. And these things are missing from our traditional approaches to security awareness. So let's try and pull that together into a bit of a model. So every behaviour we make takes place in context. There's going to be some sort of trigger, and then we're going to act. And when would be the opportune moment to try and help people here? Well, at the moment, we're doing it over here. It's not even in the context where the threat lies. Doesn't matter, in my view, how good that e-learning is. It creates a foundation, but it's not very likely to change people's behaviour. It's too infrequent and it's forgotten. And then we've got things sitting over here. So there are some tools looking at events in the seam. That's great for knowing where threat has happened or issues have happened, but you risk getting into a bit of a cycle where you're punishing people with training, as phishing simulations effectively do. It's also quite hard for people to contextualise. We are great at rationalising things after the event. There was a really good reason why I did that thing. It was the only choice I had, and then you just dismiss the training. So what our researchers suggested is there's 2 sweet spots here, really. One is here, priming people before a behaviour happens, but in the context where the threat lies. So in the research we did with Cardiff University, as people opened an inbox expecting to just sort some emails, we just gave a little 5-second nudge that said, essentially, phishing's a thing. I mean, lots of different wording to try different psychological impacts, but that had a significant impact in whether people then spotted phishing in their inbox. You're just making that information front of mind again. But even more interestingly, trying to intervene here. So as someone is about to do something risky, so they're about to click a link, they're about to enter their credentials, they're about to upload a file, or they're visiting ChatGPT, for example, and about to paste something there. So examples where you can monitor that this is happening, so you understand a baseline of behaviour, where the risk lies, but then you can start to intervene and do this in a preventative way, not just after the fact, and steer people away from the risky behaviour. So that's what we're all about at Think Cyber, and that's what we do with RedFlags. But very quickly, if I've got time, just go through an example of how you can actually apply that to your own awareness and what that could look like. So looking at Fogg's model, prompt. Start with the prompt. Timeliness is really important. So here I'm really saying, look, you want to be helping people. If it's about safe email use, you want to be reminding people about the threat in their email. Then you want to make it easy. Don't bamboozle people with all the technical ways they can spot phishing. Focus on simple things like there's going to be urgency, there's going to be manipulation, they're going to try and get you to do something you maybe don't want to do. But really simple actions, like if you're not sure, report it. And then think about motivation. So another talk, perhaps another time, but Fogg says to focus on the behaviours in this order. Worry about motivation last. So some very quick examples of what that could look like. This was the Cardiff research, really simple messaging. As people open their inbox, only takes 2 to 5 seconds to read, but it has this impact. And you don't do this very often, you just do it once, maybe once a month. Or taking that even further, if you're actually about to click a link, maybe intervening at this point to help highlight, look, this is from someone you don't know, remember to check the sender. Or even a step further than that, if you've actually clicked a link and you're trying to give away your credentials. Trying to help people understand, look, this is the point you need to think about the risk and trying to embed that secure behaviour. So very quickly, final observations. People don't always make rational decisions. Traditional approaches that we apply at the moment aren't really aligned with the way people learn and behave. What the science says is that timeliness and context are really important. So we need to think about these real-time interventions, but they shouldn't be about nagging people or telling them off after the fact. They should be about supporting. And if you can make it measurable, then you can really show that you're changing people's behaviour. So that's my argument. If you want to really engage and sustain behaviours, you need to think about a fundamentally different approach to awareness. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.